So greetings, I'm Ramona Nadaf, rhetoric faculty and director of the Art of Writing program at Townsend Humanities Center. And thank you all. Thank you for coming to this conversation between Doreen St. Félix and Hilton Als. It's really wonderful to see you all here today, though it makes me kind of nervous because Art of Writing has not had a live event for a very long time because of the pandemic. So I'm really hoping this is the first of many. And in fact, I know it is the first of one because on April 10th, the Art of Writing annual lecture will be given by Sonali Daranyagala, the author of the memoir Wave, a story of loss and grief following the 2004 tsunami in Sri Lanka. So I hope you'll all come to that. It should be extraordinary. And I'm always, as always, grateful to the marvelous team at the Townsend Center for their work in collecting all the pieces and putting it together in a seamless whole. So thank you. With so much horror in the world, I just want to begin by praising my generous friends. For it's through friends over the years that I've had the good luck to meet Doreen St. Félix and Hilton Als, our two speakers. And it's because of the Friends of Art of Writing, faculty, staff, undergraduates, and graduates, guest speakers past and present, that the Art of Writing continues to thrive and survive. And I want to thank, of course, Doreen and Hilton being generous friends of Art of Writing, generous with their time. Doreen St. Félix is as graceful and passionate a writer and intellectual as she is a person. One interviewer called her a big talent. And since the interview in 2016, she has become an even bigger talent. That same year, St. Félix was named on the Forbes 30 under 30 media list. And in 2019, she won a National Magazine Award in columns and commentary. A culture writer at MTV, an editor at large for Lenny Letter, Doreen has written for the New York Times Magazine, Vogue, Pitchfork, among other venues. She now holds the position of staff writer at the New Yorker, and all of that under 30, as I just found out really today. One has to admire her bold wit, witnessed, for example, in her article on the HBO miniseries, The Flight Attendant, which she called a hot mess, likened to a clever pop song. That thrill is in the juxtaposition of a rowdy rhythm with a lyrical portrait of tragedy and grief. She is a formidable television critic, but she's also much more. She's a writer who seeks and finds her subjects high and low in culture, politics, and the arts. Even though I found out she really wanted to be a science writer. Is that really true?
It's true.
Okay.
To please my parents.
What?
To please my parents.
Okay, well, sorry, parents. Anyway, her essays as an author once pronounced about the genre of the fable, they fantastically expose a mystery. And oftentimes that mystery is as humorous as it is political. I've only touched the surface of Doreen's subjects, her constant attachment and revelations about Black and Brown culture, her emergence as an important Haitian American public intellectual and cultural critic. Despite her increasing fame and vision, Doreen still shirks from the overly abundant use of the I word and narcissistic pronouncement. She, as she once said, is interested in a kind of ambivalence that manifests itself in the annihilation of self. If I understand correctly, Hilton Als was one of Doreen's early inspirations as she formed herself as a writer. Since 2022, Hilton Als has been a faculty member of Berkeley's English department, an inspiring and caring teacher of his Berkeley students for whose words and coming to being as writers he attends to so devotedly. We, of course, know him and read him as a writer who's never fearful to love, for example, Joan Didion and Thomas Gunn, and to let his love be transcribed in words. A staff writer and theater critic for The New Yorker, his 2013 White Girl still stands as one of the most astonishing works of criticism, bringing together an unexpected cast of characters. Hilton, as an art curator, also brings together artists in group shows such as Forces of Nature, as well as introducing artists who for too long have been left unknown. The winner of multiple prizes, Pulitzer Prize for Criticism, the Guggenheim, the Berlin Prize, to mention but a few, Hilton is often spoken about as an exceptional public intellectual, even a hero, about whom Queerty writes, quote, "He led the nation towards equality, acceptance, and dignity for all people." I personally would name him the best writer on and the most conflicted lover of the musician Prince, as memorialized as in his 2022 memoir, My Pinup. I will forever remain amazed how anyone could decline an invitation to live with Prince. But I am also and always amazed by Hilton's sentences, magnificently crafted, alive, loving, honest, and authentically present. Thank you so much, Doreen and Hilton, for being
Thank
here
you,
today.
Ramona. Thank you. Thank you, Ramona. She, Ramona only neglected to say one thing, which is that I'm not under 30. So, I'm, well, uh, bring it on. I'm so happy to be here this afternoon with you because I have a real love for Doreen. Without having spent that much time with her, we are employed by the same person, and we were just discussing, I think we should just kind of get it out of the way. One of the things that we thought we would minimize is a discussion of the New Yorker, and I said people often think of it as something that is kind of hatched every week. They don't understand that it's built on relationships. And one of the things that Doreen said was that when I emailed her for her first year um, at the magazine, she was astonished because no one really talked to you. It has a hugely long history of no one speaking to you when you work there. We were both raised in Caribbean families, and if you don't say hello or good evening to people, they're just going to hit you on the back of your head. But when I first started there, I would say good afternoon or hello to someone in the hall, and they would just kind of walk by or pretend they didn't see you. So when Doreen started working there, and I emailed her about something, it was one of your first connections with someone at the magazine. But also, I was only, I think I was kind of fake emailing her about a work thing, only to say hello and give him the opportunity to welcome this voice that was so energetic and, like the rest of us, being overworked, but with grace. So I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to tell you that story, but also to tell you that it's Doreen's sentences and also her wild sex appeal on the page. That don't worry, it's harassment or anything. That
I like it.
that she likes being harassed, and it's her sex appeal, her sentences, but I really want to talk about the physicality of your sentences, and you have one of the rare gifts for any thinker, which is that you really enjoy the body too. And I'm going to just embarrass you and read your own words. As Joan Didion said, the horrible humiliation of writing is seeing your words in print. The other humiliation is hearing them read back to you. So I apologize in advance. This is from 2002 review. Doreen doesn't review TV anymore, but this is from a 2002 review of American Gigolo. Do you remember it was briefly on television? Doreen wrote, Schrader's American Gigolo was a fashion film first and foremost. Gear was dressed almost exclusively by Giorgio Armani. Which designer would be chosen to dress our generation's exemplar striver to translate his hauteur and his anguish to silhouettes? Anguish to silhouettes. That's amazing. Raul Lopez at Luar, Mike Aucas, and Zoe Lauta of Eckhaus Lauta. Times have changed indeed, and there was no effort in this reboot to do anything like updating by way of wardrobe. Offensively, the suits are standard costume fare. My tenuous excitement for the series when it was first announced hinged on John how do you pronounce it? Bernthal? Do you guys remember him? He's so hot. He was in The Wolf of Wall Street. Do you remember the scene in the diner where he's asking for ketchup? Do you guys remember that? Okay. I often have to ask because I feel that I'm watching a different television than my students often. His and she goes on John Bernthal. His face specifically, it looks the way his name sounds. Fantastic, no? His nose is Roman, his mouth wanes. His beauty is coarse and a little wrong, and the combination is thrilling. The show punishes him and us for that beauty. The episodes weave together multiple timelines, a trope of contemporary television. So within that paragraph, she not only gives us a body, a face, and iconography, she's also giving us the possibility of being excited by something that happens on television that's not flattened out, that gets flattened out. So tell me about this experience, not being turned on, but tell me about the experience of having that visceral reaction and how to convey it in language.
I think, so I was brought to the post of television critic after Emily Nussbaum,
Yes.
who I think revolutionized our idea of how television criticism was supposed to sound.
How did she do that?
Well, in the sense, TV criticism doesn't have a Bible in the way that film criticism does. There's no cahier du television, right?
There's no Pauline Kael, there's no, right, James Agee, right.
So Nussbaum didn't have a script against which she was reacting to, and so she had to create her own. She was poppy, she loved women, and I came in very intimidated by that standard that she had set, but also interested in kind of perverting it a bit and figuring out where my love lied in television. I wasn't a big TV person. I was much more a film person when I started. And I have tended to choose television shows that turned me on visually,
Right.
as opposed to, you know, narratively or the show that I was expected to review.
Right.
And when I heard about that was actually, I think, the last TV column that I published. And so I thought about writing it, not even really as a TV column, more so as marshaling the tools that I use when I write about art. You know,
Yes.
like I was so interested in Bernthal.
Yes.
He was my whole justification for doing this column.
He was my whole life.
And
Yes.
he was my whole life. And that, you know, what other role he had that year? He was in the Serena Williams movie.
Is that the one with, what's his name? The father?
With Will's.
I can't, but go ahead. I didn't see it. Sorry.
No, it's so silly, and he's so like unsexed in that movie.
Yes.
And then this Gigolo show comes out. It's like, you can't even call it a reboot. And the television show was just absolutely terrible. And it was so clear that it had no vitality in it except for him.
Right.
And the vitality was, in fact, him having to push through the paucity of the script, the lack of imagination in the way that the show looked. And I was so like, I just felt this like really intense misery watching it.
Yes.
Because I wanted it to be something else. And
so you were looking, as a viewer and as a writer, you were looking for the ways in which reality could be reflected in some way that, whether it was the persona or the situation, bore some resemblance to the real world.
To the real world and this real person. And I think, I wonder if you felt this way having been a theater critic, but sometimes you enter that dreaded rhythm. I have to go see the show, I have to turn in the review, and all the life is sapped out. And I stopped doing the column because I felt just so overwhelmed by how much TV there was for me to consume. And sometimes I didn't like the reviews I published.
Yes.
And Bernthal gave me an opportunity to love this thing again, even as I was deciding to part from the column.
How long?
I didn't do it for that long.
Yeah.
Like 2.5 years.
Yes.
Almost 3 years.
But it quickly exhausted itself as a medium for you, and at the same time, you were writing wonderful profiles of people prior to this. Kara Walker, and then at the New Yorker, you were expanding.
Exactly.
At the same time. Tell me something about working in these different forms. Criticism has to be self-contained, and as Renata Adler said, it ultimately ends up being a yes no vote or a no vote. But whereas a profile, you're dealing very specifically with someone else's narrative. It's not your opinion, it's your observation. So did you feel freed up by this different form?
Hilton, I always think about what you say when you talk about doing profiles. You talk about becoming one with the person, entering their world.
Yes.
And part of the reason why I stopped at the TV column was because I wasn't in the world anymore.
Right.
I was on my couch, or sometimes even in my bed.
Yes.
But when it came to spending that degree of time with someone, that confused intimacy, where we're both having a conversation and then there's like a meta conversation around it.
That's right.
Was just exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to get lost in something else.
Yes.
And I wanted to feel that I had a surface to react to. And I was really frightened by the responsibility of it, but also I loved the tension of telling someone else's story, but also making it my own story. I still don't feel comfort with using the I, which Ramona framed in a much more beautiful way than how I feel it, which is just repression.
Right. Right.
It's just a tactic.
Yes.
But
it's giving voice to repression. Yeah.
But with the profile, it's a way of, I guess, just managing that fear and kind of smuggling my eye into the questions that I ask.
That's right.
Smuggling my eye into the observations.
Well, because what's happening is that it's the reader and the subject are dependent on your perspective. No matter how much shape shifting we do, ultimately the I does declare itself. So that in famous, I'm thinking of Truman Capote and Marlon Brando, or Lillian Ross on Hemingway, or any number of profiles that have been run. There is the character of the writer. I think Janet Malcolm was a great genius at making herself a character in the story, and framing it in such a way that of saying that this is a partial and not partial report about a situation. So I think that for me, anyway, the motto that I always use is the Deanne Arbus quote of, when I'm standing before the subject, I don't ask them to change their shape, I change my shape to suit them. And that's partly why it's such an exhausting but rewarding process when the shapes come out correctly.
Absolutely. I had an
excuse me.
I had an experience last year writing a profile of this artist who was about the same age as me. She was also a Black woman. Even our tattoos were placed in the same places. And her boyfriend suggested that we go to a naked spa together to do our interview. So we're already in incredibly rich territory.
Can I just turn to the audience for a second? That's a new one.
So red flag.
Like Prince, right?
Come live with me.
Yeah, exactly.
Very red flag.
Yeah.
Of course, I did it anyway.
Right.
But we had this moment where we emerged from the locker room and we were staring at each other.
The woman and Yeah, the
The
subject.
subject and I, the musician Sudan Archives, that's her name. And it was so overwhelming because, I mean, of course, there's the old cliched metaphor of like us being naked in front of each other, right?
Yes.
But also, isn't that what it is?
Yes.
Coming into a room together, you regarding me, regard you.
Yes.
And it really changed. I think it broke through something for me. And that's the first profile I've written that has a lot of I in it.
Does it feel like a relief to you when you're writing a piece that I'm going to rephrase this. When a piece comes out that you've written about a subject, do they often feel that it has changed their life, that it's a relief that these things have been said in public?
You know, I wonder if you feel this way, but it's always all over the map.
Right.
Sometimes there was one subject who I thought was going to hate it. He loved it.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me. Sometimes they don't get in touch after. And that I find completely devastating.
It's devastating because you've had this great intimacy for a year or sometimes 2 years.
It's like a breakup.
Yes.
It's like a breakup.
Yes.
And you go, no contact.
Exactly. Cold turkey.
Yeah.
How did this question of the I of revealing the self, tell me about where you come from, where this might be considered putting yourself too forward.
Right. As an excess.
Yes.
I think the way that I could justify
Excuse me.
the way that I could justify becoming a writer was if I was a serious writer.
Mm.
And I associated, I think, the I with the feminine, with the personal, with the non-authoritative. And this was when I was like in my early 20s at a school where I couldn't get into any of the advanced writing classes.
Tell me something a little bit, tell the people a little bit about your background, Doreen.
So I was raised in Brooklyn, New York, not too far from where Hilton was raised, in Canarsie. My parents are both from Haiti. They came to the States not too long before I was born. And I was raised with a lot of love and a lot of quiet. My parents were always at work. I was the sort of kid who, you know, my mom worked the night shift, my father worked the morning shift, and in between I was secreted away in a room at one of their places of work. So I was a kid that was hidden, you know, because that was childcare. And so I was just a very, very quiet, contained person. I knew how to make myself morph to whatever environment I was in so that I wasn't noticed, you know, because if I got noticed, my mom could get fired from her job. She was
It's very thoughtful. Thank you.
Thank you. She was working as a home care nurse when I was a kid. But that also made me super observant. And I wasn't overly verbal, but always writing and scribbling. And so when I think I realized that I didn't have the capacity to do a regular job, I decided to professionalize writing in my mind, to go at it in a like more careerist way. And
were you was this something that you were thinking about already in high school, because you went to a school that actually sort of catapulted you away from your parents' background?
Physically.
Tell us about that.
So I went to kind of rinky-dink Catholic schools in South Brooklyn, which I loved. I loved those schools. I loved being indoctrinated by the faith. I was obsessed with church. I picked for my confirmation saint, Therese, because of the Bernini sculpture of her being in ecstasy.
Yes.
That's me as an early pervert.
Yes.
And then
Take me, Lord, take me.
Take me.
Yeah.
And the good Lord took me to the Upper East Side. I was, you know, identified as a kid who shouldn't have been in Canarsie.
Yeah.
Who should like move on up to this like really expensive well-endowed Catholic school in Manhattan. And then from there, I ended up at Brown University.
Were you a scholarship kid at the high school?
Yeah, I was a scholarship kid.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, my mother was a nurse and my father was a doctor, but the school was still so expensive and that
Yes.
world was so impenetrable that I was poor at that school.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I got to Brown, as educated and as much as I could navigate that world, I still just wasn't, I hadn't been, I don't know, groomed in the way that these kids had.
Yes.
Harper's wasn't delivered to my parents' address.
Right.
You know? And I felt
There were no signifiers that you could hold on to.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's also how the writing program was organized. It was organized around those signifiers.
And at Brown.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a class called the Public Intellectual.
Wow.
Yeah. 19-year-olds in a class called the Public Intellectual.
Wow.
Oof.
Wow.
So yeah, I
Because
couldn't.
19, I mean,
19.
19. Really, what are 19-year-olds thinking about but carbs and sex, right?
And they should
Sorry.
be.
Right? But it's like a lot of energy is happening at that time. And so the public intellectual is the fall of public man and that history. So what were they giving you in the class?
I know, I don't know, because I couldn't get into these classes.
Yeah.
And I graduated and I taught piano for a little bit. And I worked in TV.
Had you always played
for a
music?
little bit.
Or
Yeah, because West Indian parents.
discipline?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I went to a piano school in Brighton Beach, so I would shuttle back and forth between
Yes.
and the amazing Russian neighborhood of Brighton Beach.
There's one sentence that all us Caribbean-based kids have that we all share. Don't make me go up to that school. Right.
Sometimes you don't say the sentence, you just do the eyes.
The lies, the eyes, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why am I giving you my biography right
Because
now?
I love it.
So yeah, when I graduated, really, I realized I could write for a public on the internet. I found all these amazing young people, women and gay men mostly, and we would just talk to each other. It was an epistolary culture. We just sent each other emails, these long DMs that didn't even feel like writing, right? Because we're just communicating. And then it was just this perfect pocket of time, I guess, like from 2013, 14 until 17, where I didn't need an institution to be able to.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Right.
Were these sites places like Jezebel that I read after the fact? I didn't know this was happening because of the age difference and just culturally.
So you didn't know that?
I just knew I had, I had been an editor at Vibe, and so it was all print. I didn't know that this entire culture was happening. What did it feel like at that time?
It just felt like we didn't need anyone. Like we could do it on our own. And there was a lot of we hung out a lot. We would write all day, meet up at the bar, party all night, wake up 2 hours later, you have a blog post up. It was really exciting. And
what were you writing about, Doreen? And when were you writing?
About music.
Oh.
Yeah. So I feel like I have the pretty classic music critic identity of being a quasi-failed musician.
No, just a full lover of music.
Just the love.
You're not a failure at anything. Yeah.
But there was piano, and also I sang in the choir, the church choir. And I was an obsessive. And so my first I would say real job as a writer was working at MTV, which was one of those places, although it was a historical brand, they had gotten new money pumped into it, and they had a bunch of young people writing music criticism. So I was in the Pitchfork, Jezebel, MTV circle in New York.
Was that a culture that older institutions like Harper's or the New Republic or the New Yorker was paying attention to?
I think we didn't realize that they were paying attention
Mm,
to what we were doing.
mhm.
And if you look now, unfortunately, tragically, upsettingly, many of these places no longer exist. Or if they do exist, they exist as ghosts of what they formerly were.
Why is that? What happened?
I mean, what's happening in media writ large? I mean, even at Condé Nast,
Mhm.
Pitchfork is now going to become a column, I think, at GQ.
Right.
There's this music criticism has always been ghettoized. You know, there's this idea that it's like secondary or tertiary to what we call culture,
Mhm.
films, books, and now television. But
Mhm.
music never really, I think, was placed on that tier. But I had no idea that David Remnick was reading MTV News, but he
Right.
was.
Right.
But he also has a particular interest, I think, in always being as current as possible.
Yes.
But if you look at the diaspora of the people who used to work at these places, they're at these institutions now. Like Gia, our colleague, was a Jezebel writer. Now she's at the New Yorker. Amanda Petrusic, amazing music writer, is also with us. So it's kind of heartbreaking when you think about it.
Because the freedom that you were given or that you were exercising actually allowed you to develop your voice in an unself-conscious way, that you weren't developing your voice in relation to an institution or in support of, you were developing your voice in support of your own self.
Exactly.
But to go back to this idea of criticism again, when you started to do it professionally, professionally, right, in a magazine, and you were very quickly exhausted by the ways in which a magazine requires this kind of work. Tell me something about the dreams that you had as a writer starting out. Was your dream always to have the immediate feeling of a critic, or did you have other aspirations like fiction or poetry or playwriting, any of those things?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the taxonomy of writers, critic was the one I understood last. Although
Fascinating.
was through my sister, who's 10 years older than I am, like was the vibe obsessive, a honey obsessive, essence. But I didn't know it was criticism. Like that word didn't have a meaning for me, I think. And prior to entering that world in like a professional way, I was writing a lot of fiction. And that's why I started off in TV. My first real job was working on a Steve McQueen TV show, actually.
In the writer's room?
Yeah, I was like both in the crew and also in the writer's room a little bit.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this show.
And tell the folks who Steve McQueen is if they don't watch the same channel we do.
So Steve McQueen is a British filmmaker. You may have seen his television show on Amazon. It was called Small Axe. It was an anthology show, but just like total genius. Became very famous in America, I think, for 12 Years a Slave. But he, in 2014, being always ahead of the curve, wanted to make a TV show. This was before filmmakers were making television. And it was called Codes of Conduct. And HBO gave him money, they gave him a studio, and they gave him 6 months to make a pilot.
Which is a long time?
Long time. Typically, you don't get that long. And typically, a studio doesn't support you to that extent. But this was right after he'd won the Oscar. And I was brought in because they couldn't find someone who was a writer who spoke Haitian Creole. Initially, my job was I was supposed to be like a consultant to make sure they had the language correctly. But spending time in the writer's room allowed me to insinuate myself where I was not at all ready to be. But it was an incredible experience. And I felt so lucky. I was like, okay, I'm going to be a TV writer now. This is great. And then HBO didn't pick up the pilot. And so I think that was probably January. and I didn't have a job because I had stopped teaching piano because I was like, I'm going to be a famous TV writer. And I was living with my parents.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, West Indian people, we don't leave just because we're in our
Just because you're
20s.
grown, right? Exactly.
But because that failed, I think that's when I realized I could be on the other side.
Mm.
But yeah, initially I just always wanted to tell stories. And I think what I loved about your criticism, even when I was a teenager reading Old Village Voices, was that you were telling stories, even when you were writing about artworks. I know that Renata says it's a yes or a no, but I think that you expand that. There's like a feeling of evaluation not being the aperture that you're necessarily working within. And that really made a mark on me.
Oh, thank you.
Even though I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what you were doing.
Well, thank you. I think that one of the things that I was trying to do was to defy journalism. I think that one of the things that was so great about working at The Voice, and I think music is such a wonderful education for a writer because it's you can't hold it, and it's a completely sort of corporeal feel. It's a feeling, and one of the reasons that there have been so few music critics at various institutions, other than great people like Ellen Willis, who was the first music critic rock critic at the New Yorker, is that it takes a while to develop the language, and we live in such a speeded up culture that if you can't say what a thing is quickly, I think that I don't want this time together to go away without mentioning that you started to also write about art in a very real and visceral way. Tell us about your experience, for instance, of working on a piece about Kara Walker. What was it like for you to go out into the world? You met Steve McQueen, but then you were starting to meet all these young women of a great accomplishment. Tell us about those experiences. Or tell us about Kara, actually.
Right. So Kara, I was probably 25 when I wrote that story, which was for New York Magazine. Hilton had already amazingly profiled her in the New Yorker. And I remember feeling I just felt superfluous. I didn't understand why we needed to tell the story again. You'd already done it.
Right.
And so initially when they messaged me, I said no. And I was like, you don't need to have her on the cover of your magazine. The story has already been told. But this was, of course, around the time of the Sphinx.
Yes.
And so
let's tell the folks what that is.
Right. So in 2016.
Yeah, 17 maybe?
17,
Yeah.
Kara Walker created this monumental sculpture in the Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn, New York, called the Sphinx, of a Black woman, or a Sphinx represented through what we know as the Black female body. And the story actually came out after the show had been closed.
Right.
And so it was in the afterglow. But then once I had like a preliminary conversation with her, I realized there was something there because of our generational difference.
Yes.
And also because she was in that period of exhaustion. She was in the wake.
Yes.
And I was not someone who really spent a lot of time in galleries. I did go to museums a lot because my mother is a great ceramicist and she loved museums. She'd take me there. But not galleries. You know, for so long, I didn't know you could walk into a gallery down below. I thought you had to pay or something.
Oh, that's sweet.
But I mean, they're so imposing. They're not inviting.
Well,
places.
yeah.
And
actually sort of more interesting than museums a lot of the time.
Always.
Yeah.
So I came to Canada with an innocence, and I was aware of that innocence, and I was aware that I didn't have the vocabulary even, or the reservoir of references that you need to do it in the like art criticism way. And so then I just was like, well, then I'm not going to write it like art criticism.
Right.
And I think that's always been my mode, especially when it comes to writing about art, because I think it's also a feeling. Although we are doing exegesis on this thing, it's about how it makes me feel.
That's right. I mean, that ultimately the object is the transmits and transmutates our consciousness. And one of the things that I love about your writing is that it's been a kind of journal. If you think about a public journal about your growth and also where you come from. So when you wrote about Zimwe, it's really about that culture of we were able to do it for ourselves and what happens when that self becomes commodified. I'm going to just read that a little bit, if you don't mind. Doreen writes, Ziwe often relies heavily on the prefab obsessions of the liberal intelligentsia. Not bad. The first episode of the show is called 55%, a reference to both the estimated percentage of white women who voted for Trump and the discourse that has exploded around that fact. The most viral segment of the pilot was Ziwe's sit down with the humorist Fran Lebowitz. There was a sexy juxtaposition, generational and racial, and the clash of egos. Early on, Leibowitz's legs crossed warns Ziwe that she doesn't play games, a caution that the host summarily ignores. Leibowitz, to prove her progressive bona fides, begins to critique Barack Obama, and Sharon reads, white woman has opinion on Obama. The editors of Z-Way are as much responsible for the queasiness of the interviews as Z-Way is herself. As Leibowitz speaks, her words are bleeped out. The siren, quote, we will not be airing this because we want to go to the Rock Nation brunch, unquote. Here is the profoundly inventive element of Z-Way, the send-up of the Black grifter. The personality who exploits a desire for reconciliation and ingenuously twists the fetish of Black female moral authority for her own gain. Anytime a guest dares to question Z-Way, at one point, Bowen Yang, in on the joke, meekly asks the host about her wealth. She contorts her beautiful face as if accusing the guest of disrespect. No one gets to come for the mad queen. Curiously, the show, not ready to skewer its host head-on, opts to do so through other bits, as in a fake commercial on Imperial Wives doll named Tina, who, quote, uses social justice language for profit, unquote. You have such an extraordinary way of not only seeing what the image is, but the historical context for what the production or what the labor of entertainment brings to us. And I think that this framing is actually sort of brilliant because you don't actually, like the most profound critics or the greatest critics we have, you don't actually have to see the event or the thing. What you're there for is the voice of the criticism. And the development of your voice has been so rapid and extraordinary. Do you think, or do you feel that the work of doing the regular criticism has contributed to the development of your style and function as a profile writer?
You know, I was a brat, and I didn't like the idea that my boss was telling me that I needed to do something to become a better writer, because that's what my boss said. Remnick was like, you need to be publishing regularly in order to work the muscle. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to take my time. I love it when I have a profile. It's like, okay, you don't have to write for 3 months.
Yes.
Because you're researching and you're reporting. But I don't think that anything could have made me feel that freedom than paradoxically the restriction of the weekly column. It was so important to kind of like, it did feel like going to the gym. Like there's something I don't want to do. There's something I don't want to see even, but I have to marshal these skills that I'm so invested in improving in order to write this, because the magazine is going to come out and that column has to exist. And so it made me, I think, shed I think that my generation is kind of too righteous in a lot of ways, and especially when it comes to not engaging with things that they think are bad or wrong or evil. And I had that instinct too. So often it was just like, if I'm going to write about this thing, then it's just going to be like a summary, this is bad, or I'm going to choose to not write about it. But I think that shuts you off from the world.
Well, you're doing a kind of moral obstinacy,
Right.
which, or moralizing obstinacy, which doesn't serve anybody except the person who's having the tantrum.
Exactly.
Because it is a tantrum.
And
So,
it's self-centered.
yes, I think that. But you were a great enough writer, but also, like most great writers, a great reader, and did this way of sort of digging in your heels. Did reading other writers have a strong effect on you that you had to kind of pull yourself together?
Absolutely. Get yourself together, girl. I have these like books that I don't even use as books. I use them as totems. I just have them around me. Seduction and Betrayal,
Elizabeth Hardwick,
on Michael Jackson,
Margot Jefferson.
White Girls. Have you heard of that one? But I just have them on the desk. And they became portals of permission for me.
Yes.
Once I realized that I wanted to develop a critic voice, even within the very conventional column space, that was like a little wrong, like a little off, interested in writing reviews that didn't feel like they were for the reader as consumer.
Right.
As opposed to the reader as reader.
Right.
I think TV criticism has a gloss of like the serviceable on it. You know, TV criticism is something people link to the trades. Like, I'm going to read Entertainment Weekly, and this person is going to tell me what to think of this TV show, as opposed to, I want to engage in a practice of thinking of television as an art.
Let me ask you, in the final moments, where do you want to take your writing? Where do you want to go forward with your work? In what genres?
Yeah, so right now, I've been pretty seriously spending time writing a book, a novel.
Wonderful.
Yes, and it's not like I'm not like under contract to write it. It's just something I'm doing for myself. And that is also, I think,
To give yourself permission.
the stage that I'm in, because so much of my writing career, because it was intercepted by the New Yorker, I don't think I had a lot of time to be like not attached to institutions.
Yes.
And so I could go, the way of like proposal, get the deal. But it's been personally so crucial that it's something that I do for myself in private.
Yes.
And who knows if it'll eventually be published. But I am in the time where like, I think I did things really quickly in my 20s. And now I just want to slow down. So that's like the personal project that I'm doing.
You want to slow down and breathe literature. It has a breath and it has a rhythm.
Yes.
That's not about the quick response. It has everything to do with the rhythm of your own breathing, really.
And the rhythm of your life. Like when I was writing, often at the magazine, I would have to publish 2 or 3 times a week because it was expected.
Yeah.
And I didn't live in between those publications because I was just so tired. I'd publish and then go to sleep, and then I'd start writing again. And I've realized like I really need to start living more. Like I need to be experiencing love, heartbreak, partying, not partying, travel. Like I want my life and my writing to be more kind of terminally intertwined.
Oh, that's a lovely phrase.
Yeah, thank you.
And it shall, and it will always be. Thank you, Doreen. I think we have a few moments for about 2 to 3 questions if folks want to ask this very intelligent, delightful creature something that will help them, or this young person. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. I mean, as you know, I'm just a huge fan. Doreen and Hilton, I'm a huge fan as well. And
I don't mind second billing.
part of why I'm such a fan is not only because of the breadth of the subjects that you cover, the media, the forums, but throughout that you both have such an attunement to performance. So I mean this, quite literally television, theater, but also, the profile is that sort of space in which I think both of you have demonstrated that attunement to performance, performances, certain cultural codes, and bringing those to the fore, I think, is such a great skill.
Yes.
Now, I want to tie this to, Doreen's very astute assessment of what it meant to come up in that sort of online writing 2014 to 2017 space, about which, N+1 did, you could say, a diagnostic, or a postmortem, that, writing criticism is always an audition for something else more sustaining,
Oh.
something else better paying, to be frank. So, going from writing 250-word critics picks for Art Forum to the essay, to the catalog essay,
Right.
to perhaps curating the exhibit, it's
Oh, that's interesting.
interesting
Statement.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent, because it doesn't seem like either of you knew you were doing that, or had that expectation that and that's why I say that N+1 did it as a sort of post-mortem, a diagnostic, because I don't think any of us writing for the internet in that period could have known that all, thanks to private equity and venture capital, these magazines would be going away.
Oh.
And so I want to sort of maybe ask the two of you to think about, and maybe tell us a little bit about what it's like to look back and think about the critic who no longer has that sort of stable home or page, to what it would mean to now audition for, for the better gig, or whatever.
Wow, that's a profound what you're saying and asking. And often students will ask me how to, and one thing that I always say is write the thing that they don't know that they need. So if you're a reader of X publication or online thing, and you notice that they don't do something, then it's your responsibility, if you're interested in having that kind of collaboration. I've known a number of people, friends of mine who are who've done well, and almost invariably they say that they wrote something that they noticed wasn't happening at this particular place. So I feel that there's no such thing as a niche publication anymore, but you can make a niche for yourself by doing the work without asking permission. It goes back to what Toni Morrison would say, but this is vis-a-vis fiction, and how she would walk into the class and say, I was relatively old when I started writing fiction, and I know that you're waiting for permission, so I give you permission to write. So I always give my students permission to just say, I'm going to do the thing, whether it's a play or a piece of prose, write the thing that you know that they didn't know that they needed. It's like dreaming, but constructive dreaming.
Right.
How about you, Doreen?
I think we did a workshop this weekend.
Uh-huh.
And I see so many of you here, and I love that you're here. It's nice to see you again. And something that I think I realized alongside everyone else in the workshop was that our brains are trained to think about writing always as mediated through the idea of it being published.
Right.
And I think that, I guess I'm worried about the idea that the writing is validated through the fact of the publication.
Right.
There's writing this thing that we desperately have to do because it's in our constitution, and then there's writing as a career, as a profession.
Right.
And I don't know, I mean, I'm 10 years removed from people who are in college now, and I always say, I don't know if you should work for a publication after you graduate.
Right.
You know, historically, the writer has not been gainfully employed through writing. I mean, unless you get a patron.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard there's some around. There's some.
Yeah.
Werner is now funding the Drift.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They made me speak at that party. I'd forgotten about that. I did do that. So I did it in love and support of these women who are the making the magazine, but it's just extremely touching to me that it's still the human desire to communicate
Right.
is very strong.
Right.
And some of your writing will be for publication, some won't, right? So some of us do our night work, which is the quiet work, the thing that is yourself. And at the same time, you're doing this other work in your voice that has a different purpose. I don't think that, I've never felt it to be different. I've never felt a divide between that wish and that hope. Not so much that there would be an ideal reader, but that there would be someone I could talk to. It's like talking to someone. So I think that's what he's asking mostly. Don't give up. Is it sort of like that?
I'm talking about the media infrastructure.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
That we can't solve. Like, that's like dinner and 8,000 martinis. Like, but I think that in your question, there has to be a purpose to the question, not so much based on what that looks like, but what the human looks like wanting to connect in it, you know? Does that make sense? You're nodding your head. Thank you. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah.
But also we can talk more about it.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel about it?
I mean, so I am an art critic. You know, I've published in the legacy publications, including your own. But I write criticism. I'm also a graduate student here to make ends meet.
Right.
And, you know, I worked in museums for years, and I would stay after to write my freelance pieces and, you know, publishing for magazines. But, you know, there's also the question of taking a principled stance. So I no longer write for Artforum anymore.
Right.
I no longer write for the New York Times, you know, because of these sorts of things. But then, you know, you want to say, start a publication like The Drift. The Drift is now, you know, backed by David Swerner.
Right.
It's not so easy to get from A to B.
No, it's not. But this is, I mean, you might not even know this, but I publish a broadsheet and I give it away. It's free.
I used to get it at the ICA.
We'll send it to you again. But the whole point is that it's a free space for people. Right. I don't want to live in any kind of bitterness at all, ever. And I don't want to be bitter about what a publication does or doesn't do. It's an institution and I'm an individual. They have their shit and I have my own. So one of the ways in which I'm not beholden to the institution is to find ways to be free always. And I think I understand your question, but in a way, I want to marginalize it because it's giving them too much power. And the power is you. The power is the creator, not in terms of whatever stupid shit Art Forum does or whatever new regime is at the New York Times. That's always going to be a pain in the ass. What we have to find are ways to feel the freedom that we need and desire to express ourselves. I'm sorry, it's so weird. I didn't even understand the question properly because my head is so far away from those people. And
I think about when Greg Tate died, I noticed in a lot of Greg Tate being this incredible, I mean, you can call him a music critic, but really he was a seer. He saw everything. He saw the matrix. He saw the world as the matrix. And I noticed in some of the obituaries, there was mention of the fact that he hadn't been accepted or published in like the big institutions, right? You know, he did not have like a big New York Times page or a New Yorker page. And it's like, but Greg Tate is a god.
right,
You go downtown Brooklyn and there's a huge mural of his face.
right.
And there's a generation of people who wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for him.
Right, but he was, but I think that what they're saying, and this goes back to your point, but what they're saying is that he's not living in that frame.
Right.
If you knew Greg, and I did, he'd made another choice. He was like, actually, I want to be a musician and perform all of the things that I've been writing about. That my freedom, my hard-earned freedom away from criticism is to do music. So, and organize musicians and so on. But I think that there's too much, we're giving away too much of our power if we think that the institution is equal to the individual. I just never felt that, even as a kid. I think because I had a father, and it just never made sense to me that he would, as a presumed authority, could tell me how I felt or how the world was, or it truly did not make sense to me. I didn't understand, and I still don't understand. I'm sorry, it's my failing. Okay, good. Who else has a thought? Yes.
So maybe to that end, and following up on the broadsheet and the kind of the need to communicate and be in contact, I'm curious if you have other kind of practices and pursuits of how you do those reps that are not just publishing every week. You know, Doreen, you were talking about having to go to sleep and then wake up and write. What are the ways that you practice that writing that are outside of and not in relationship to the institutions, and have you always maintained those? How have those changed over your career? Yeah.
Teaching really has, for me, it's not a job. They don't pay you enough for it to be a job. It's a vocation. And it really grows out of love, like you love them. And the conversation has to be built on love, not, I think that when you have trouble with students who have trouble with authority, they believe in the authority, right? They believe in the institution. They believe that the authoritative text, whether it's the patriarch, whatever, they believe in that. So when I walk into the room, they can project whatever. And generally they tell you within 2 weeks of class. But what takes them a longer time to get to now, and it's very sad and heartbreaking, but I'm committed, is to understand that you're walking into the room with love, that you're not walking in as the patriarchy, the boogeyman, the guy to fuck over, the whatever. You're walking into the room because you love them, and you want to have a level of acceptance that goes back and forth because it's a dialectical relationship. I'm learning tons from the students too. So I think that one of the deeply fucked up things about, I hate to say it, but one of the deeply fucked up things about current practices is that many people walk into the room believing that the institution is evil and not understanding that the professor is the individual, not the institution. How about you?
It's funny, I've, over the past year, been practicing doing more of these workshops, and it's amazing how much energy
Is that
like,
amazing?
that I've gotten.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how like life-starved I was before.
Oh, honey.
As-
Give me your hand. Oh, oh.
Give me-
Yum, 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 yum.
But I was just hella lonely.
Yes.
And I think you know, going back to the atmosphere of the office, the lack of chatter, the library feel,
Yes.
the sense of siloing.
Yes.
I'm just I don't have any interest in that anymore.
That's right.
And
You
I
get spoiled after.
it's
Yeah.
true. My friends and I are even fabricating places for us to have practice. Like, you know, we have book clubs now
Yeah.
where we don't even read the book, but what we're doing is just
That's lovely.
talking and confessing.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm railing against the current condition, but like just being around people, like
Yeah.
our lives are so atomized in this moment,
Yeah.
especially we're all still reeling and recovering in this
Yes.
pandemic.
Yes. It's a wonderful thing of, you know, I was working on a long piece about Angela Davis, and she was amazed that, and she doesn't, you know, she's 80 and she still loves to teach, even when it was on Zoom, she was doing it on Zoom. But she said that she was always touched and amazed when she would say that I'm learning so much from you. And the students would look at her completely sort of surprised. And she said, it's a relationship. And that's really what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in, I don't even know how to describe it. But I'm interested in the relationship, and you're interested in it now too. That's great.
Yeah, it's
We should
amazing.
talk to the folks here. Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. That'd be good. Anyway, thanks, guys. Thank you so much.